friends, welcome to episode 185 of Storyteller Conclave. This is a show all about helping you run the best tabletop role-playing game that you can. Whether you're a new storyteller or dungeon master learning the craft, or an experienced storyteller looking to take your game to the next level. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Rob.
How we doing, Rob?
You know, I'm still kind of rushing a bit. Mixlr decided to change its interface a little bit on me, and, I didn't get the tea water started fast enough, and we've got a guest, and so I'm, trying to get all the little things together.
Yeah,
so.
lots of discordant little ducks to get in a row there.
Yeah, not to mention, I was sick, and now you've got kind of the same thing I have.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
At least you're not into the, can do a Ford truck commercial voice, which everybody seems to be getting out of this. So.
I did, but there's problems with me doing that voice. So
yeah. So,
it's funny because I think I almost definitely got it at my game.
Yes,
you know, and so. It's like I'm sitting there, going through a box of Kleenex, and I'm just like, worth it! It was a good game anyways!
It was a really, really good game.
I apologize if I sound nasally or wheezy or cough or anything like that, so I am still getting over that. I have a box of Kleenex next to me, and some hot tea brewing,
yes.
And we will get through this.
We will be good. I did the honey ginger. We have extra honey here. I think we'll be good to go for the show.
It sounds like a great remedy.
So, welcome to everybody in the live chat as well, and those listening on Mixlr, we're glad to have you. Today, we had your game, but we've already spoken about that because that was the previous week.
Yeah, that was previous week. Yeah.
I don't think we have anything new.
We have we have double creature feature coming up next weekend, which is your game and Mouse Guard at the same time.
Correct, which will be a lot of fun because we go from my level of excitement to super relaxed, chill out Mouse Guard, which I'm looking forward to.
Mouse Guard, yeah.
So at least our game is very chill. So that's a wonderful feeling to have.
And then I've been dealing with a lot of writer's block.
Yes.
How to. Just because I need to kind of meticulously plan how I trickle out certain plot lines to make them land correctly, which I think is going swimmingly. By the way,
I agree. I think it's fantastic.
Because I have seen you guys pick up on a lot of the things that I've been dropping, and it's really great. However, this next game session I've already got almost completely written, and we don't play until December 4th. And it's because I have hit such a great spot of inspiration for how our last game ended. Sean's character made me invent an NPC on the fly and asked him some questions about a plot I didn't have planned.
Well, that's what you get when you have a tactical social player.
Yeah, exactly. And so I was very put out during the time because I didn't know how to deal with it, and I really wanted to give him a good experience, but I had to invent all of that stuff on the fly.
Yeah.
And then once I was able to sleep on it, basically overnight, I was like, oh, I've got some ideas. So I've already bought some minis off of myminifactory.com. And I may be constructing yet another dedicated terrain board set.
That's awesome.
For this next game.
Hopefully reusable for other things.
I mean, yeah. If look, all you guys need to do is have something that is set in that sort of a venue, and you may use it for whatever you wish. Yeah.
No, I've definitely got some things coming up for my game where I'm going to be able to use those scenes in random.
Sure.
I do have a lot of the digital boards ready to go, just in case, because I literally have no idea what you guys are going to do, because you have a lot of avenues to go, but I'm prepared for 95% of it.
Yeah, exactly. So. Just drop me a Discord message. Hey, Sarah, bring the tavern.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll bring the tavern.
Yeah, we'll see what happens with it. So,
all right, so we have a show.
We have a show, and we have someone technically on hold right now.
We do. So the show, what we wanted to talk about tonight, we get a lot of questions, especially in our Discord, of newer storytellers who want to know about world building.
Yes, and
not just any world building, not just getting it across to your players, but in fact actually building the world itself from the standpoint of homebrew settings. How do you come up with the homebrew setting? Right. How do you invent all this stuff and make it all live? And so we have with us, at least maybe, do we?
We'll find out here in a second.
Well, my Discord just dropped, yeah.
I think Discord's being a little weird right now, maybe.
Well, that's going to make it inconvenient. Anywho, who we have with us, hopefully, is a man by the name of Dave Somerville. And Mr. Somerville is a published author of a couple different settings. He's actually made some of his own game systems as well.
Correct.
You can find some of those actually up on Drive-Thru RPG. And Dave, if you're... my Discord just came back up. Dave, if you're still with us...
Let's see if we can get you unmuted. Oh no, we may have lost Dave briefly. He can hear us, but he can't talk. Okay, we'll have to figure out what's going on.
Everything was working fine literally up until this exact moment.
This very moment. So, we'll get things. We'll get Dave back on the line here. I feel almost like a radio show that keeps getting disconnections. And I will say this: there has been a lot of weird internet stuff going on in the last 72 hours.
There has been, yeah.
Level 3 had a huge issue and an outage that affected me. I couldn't get to my work, but I could get to other things yesterday.
Yeah, Wide Open West had a big hiccup yesterday as well.
Yeah, and
middle of the day.
And then of course Ticketmaster's literal shutdown of half the internet from Tay-Tay tickets.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it was just a little bit chaotic, to say the least, out there.
Yep.
So let's see what's going on here. We'll see if we can reconnect and get Dave. Oh, I may be disconnected. Hold on. Let's see what we can do here.
Alrighty, well, we'll take a look at that. But in the meantime, like I said, we have these questions about about actually creating a homebrew world, and so David actually reached out to us regarding his the setting he had just actually finished publishing, which is called Planegea, which is a fantasy prehistoric setting for D&D 5th edition, and we were both absolutely fascinated by it. So we thought, who better to talk to us about building their own homebrew world than someone who has done it literally professionally.
Yeah. Did we get you back, Dave?
You did. I had to ride a T-Rex and jump through a time portal, but I'm here now.
It is good to hear you.
That is no easy task, man. I have ridden a T-Rex before, and oh boy.
Yeah, I mean, to say the least, both Sarah and I, and a few of our listeners, to say the least, have played Ark Survival Evolved. So, my brain, when we first saw the setting, was like, oh my gosh, somebody made Ark Survival Evolved for D&D. That is fantastic. And my question, of course, today was, hey, do you know about Ark? And he's like, no. And I'm like, oh my god, that makes it 20% better. Because now it's a totally different thing.
But I can't say that I played it. But man, I will tell you though, while I was working on it, I pulled up the Ark Wiki more than once because those game designers have done some thinking about how to bring dinosaurs into everyday life in really awesome ways.
Oh, yeah. How do you gamify a Stegosaurus,
Exactly.
Oh, I love it. It's awesome.
So, David, I am so glad you were able to join us. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm so glad we can hear you and that we're having... If something drops, we'll definitely keep talking back between Discord here to make sure we get it. But why don't you give us a little flavor of yourself? I know we said you've created some games. How did you step into the game world, if you could, in a small bite of information?
Sure, yeah. Well, I'm late to RPGs, but early to games. I think I trace my origin story for games back to when I was a kid. My dad was an early adopter of technology, and I remember watching him play Hack, which was basically the original roguelike on a black and white or green and black monitor, and just watching him delve into these dungeons. And from very early on, the idea of games where you're making choices, and then there was an element of chance and then consequence because it had permadeath. All of that captured me from an early age. And from then it was on to choose your own adventure books and filling composition notebooks with world building ideas. I went on to do some pixel art for an iPhone game, write some narrative, and then wrote some narrative for another game, and created a board game called Vast the Crystal Caverns, which I wasn't really in the board game scene very much. I just knew the experience that I wanted to have was this very living, vivid dungeon. And this was someone who had never played a moment of D&D, hadn't had access to that as a kid. And so I just had this idea of what if this, you could have a really vibrant, living sort of classic dungeon kind of a world. So I made a board game about it, and then discovered, oh, they already have that. It's called RPGs. And from then on, it was pretty much hook, line, and sinker into first 4th edition D&D, then 5th, and the wide world of indie games after that.
Very good, very good.
Yeah. So, stepping kind of into RPGs as a whole, you obviously got interested in them, and then that evolved into you almost creating this, and I would say relatively instantly, in timeline wise. So, how did that come about?
Yeah. Well, I have. I love the design of games. I really care a lot about it. And so I started off, I think I played a couple of sessions as a player, but very rapidly was like, oh, I want to DM. And my first experience DMing was not actually at a table. It was over Twitter DMs. Me and 2 friends ran a long running, I think it was over a year, of like a 2 PC game, just in DMs. And I built my first world there. And I remember all I had when I started was, you are in the rain and you see a shack and you want to get out of the rain, run for the shack. And I didn't know anything about what was around them. I just knew it was kind of like fantasy, kitchen sink Europe, analog, and like, yeah, get some shelter. And then sort of post by post, session by session, choice by choice, built out the world around who they were and their choices and what they encountered. And I really cut my teeth on world building for RPGs in that context.
Okay.
Yeah, and then from there, I ran that same setting for family. I accidentally introduced my whole family to D&D, and they accidentally loved it. Asked me about running a improvised one-shot for 11 family members, including nieces and grandparents.
Oh my God.
As someone who and literally introducing what the game is, making all of their PCs, making a setting, and running it all in a day was a good time.
That sounds like an absolute nightmare.
It was great. The nightmare was, I was like, we're going to do this. And I came up with this 3-hour one shot. And then after an hour, they were like, that's great. Good job. And I was like, wait, but the dragon, but you got the dragon though.
But what about Act 2 and 3?
It's cool.
Yeah, exactly. So from there, where did Planegea come from? Where did this idea even birth? I mean, we've talked about it and I'm kind of leading through it, but like, it's still kind of incredible that you stepped into this. Now, obviously, there was a little bit of inspiration, and we'll kind of come from that. But when did this birth after all of that?
Yeah, after all of that, so I ran that setting for a while and really found that it lacked enough going on, right? There was sort of like the generic fantasy felt generic and sort of inert. And so I found myself reading up on, on the hobby and on the history of the hobby, and stumbled across the Wizards of the Coast fantasy setting search that led to the creation of Eberron. And I was fascinated by this. I missed it because I was basically a 5th edition kid, and started wondering, like, well, if I had been around when Wizards of the Coast was asking people to send in a fantasy world, what would I have chosen? And I scribbled out a couple of ideas. I don't remember what the other ones were because I hit on Stone Age fantasy, and I was like, okay, that I could see that being kind of cool. And what's great about the search is I sort of made myself a task of acting like I really was submitting something to the search. So it listed a few prompts, like you could only write one page, and it had to be, what is the world? Who are the heroes and what do they do? What are the villains and what do they do? How does magic work? What do adventures look like? Like this really high level thinking. And by filling that out, I very quickly discovered there's something here. And then the next step when they ran the competition was to do a 10-page treatment. So I did a 10-page treatment, and then it was to do a 100-page treatment. And that 100-page treatment turned into the 500-page book that I have in front of me here.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah.
No, but that's a great framework to start from. And to think of it in those guidelines gave you some very strong structure that you had to pick from. I think that's a great way of looking at it and defining it, and that's actually not a bad formula to try and to see if your idea flushes well.
Well, right, because it forces you to start small, where it's like you've only
very
got one
broad
page.
strokes,
You've only got one page, so you've got to think about it in the broad concepts. Like, okay, now you've got 10 pages, so now you can get a little more refined, but you still can't get super detailed.
Right.
And you ask some pointed questions like, well, how does magic work?
Right.
Who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys?
Yeah, it's that sales pitch that you're throwing to players in a very formulaic way.
Yeah.
So, which is fantastic. So where did the whole dinosaur idea came from? Which book? What movie? Where were you? Where did this headspace come from?
I know what my answer is, but I didn't write the setting, so
that's true.
What's your answer? I want to know.
Chrono Trigger, actually.
Okay.
Chrono
amazing.
Trigger is a great game for the Super Nintendo back in the day. One of the best games ever made, in my humble opinion, and in the opinion of a lot of other people. Great soundtrack, and it involves time-traveling heroes trying to defeat an ancient evil that has basically always been with the planet.
Okay.
And this ancient evil arrives during the prehistoric era.
Okay.
And shifts the balance of power, basically, where there is humans and dinosaurs that are both vying for essentially the evolutionary top rung of the ladder.
Okay.
And this ancient evil making impact with the planet and burrowing into its core essentially offsets that thing, because we were essentially destined to be a dinosaur-run planet.
Okay.
And it tilts the balance of power and causes history to remember humans instead of dinosaurs, and so humans take over the planet.
Intriguing. I never followed the game, but I had a few friends who played it. So.
There is a prehistoric character named Isla that you can invite to your team, and she's this like brute bruiser, and she's adorable. So it's great. It's great. It's good fun.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Okay, Chrono Trigger is going on the list.
Oh,
I know the name, but I haven't played it.
Now,
I think
100%. You're gonna love it.
So
awesome.
what was yours? Where did this really birth from?
Mine was Roland Emmerich's 10,000 BC.
Oh, the movie, okay.
I don't know. For those of you who weren't as fascinated by this as I was, the guy who made Independence Day made a sort of, it's kind of a B movie, to be honest with you. It is a big prehistoric spectacle. I remember seeing the trailer and I was like, I gotta see that. But I had no concrete plans. And then one day I was in my basement apartment and my two brothers showed up, and apparently my wife had arranged for them to come by, grab me, throw me in the back of the Jeep, and drive me to the biggest movie theater around, which is like this 2-story screen outside of Washington, D.C. at the Uptown Theater. And man, I wasn't expecting it. I got hauled into this experience. I got thrown in front of this massive screen, and I watched this movie that I have never watched again, because I am sure that it can't live up to what it is in my mind. It is just this. It was like falling through a time portal. It was this transportive, incredible, amazing experience.
Oh yeah.
I don't want to spoil anything, but the movie does an excellent job of putting you in the mindset of a smart, resourceful, prehistoric person. The conceit is not that this person is an idiot. It's that they are living in tricky circumstances from the get-go, and then they run up against things that are far too big for them. And I think a lot of this setting came from that. But I also have to give kudos to two other big movies, which were Stargate, because I saw it way too young and it terrified me.
Yes.
The idea of running into these like incredibly more powerful than you, like this sort of Egyptian style power that was just like so far beyond what you had any way of processing, I think paired so well with what you found in 10,000 BC.
Okay.
And then the third thing was Mad Max Fury Road. And I saw that and it rocked. I was watching it. I was like 10 minutes in. I was like, oh, this might be my favorite movie now. And that experience continued all the way to the end. And I watched that. And then when I sat down to start to do this setting, I was like, I want to make Mad Max with woolly mammoths.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
Absolutely.
That is a great way of feeling. Do you feel that, in a quick sense, Do you feel that you got that? That you got that feeling when it was done?
Yeah, I think I did, because that was the bar I held myself to. Every time I was writing something, I asked myself, like, does this feel out of control? Does it feel too big? Does it feel like a war wagon, like charging towards you? And if it didn't, I drew an 11 on the speaker and turned it up one notch higher.
That's fantastic.
Yes.
I think I got there.
Okay, so having this level of inspiration of where did you start? Where did you start from? A gigantic overview? Did you just grab components? Did you get scenes, mythology?
Yeah, I'm actually a big believer that one of the most common mistakes of world building is to start with the history and the mythology. Because one thing I love about the fantasy setting search material is it doesn't say what's the history of your world. It says who are the heroes and what do they do.
Yeah.
And so keeping everything present tense, especially in the Stone Age, where like you are prehistory, you are the first of everything, felt really, really, really important to me. And throughout the book, there are hints at things that have come before, but it is extremely light on any detail for sort of what precedes you, because the whole conceit is you're the first. Like, you go out there and you do it, and you're going to be the one who they're making constellations about.
Oh wow, yeah. No, I think it's great advice too, to start with what do the heroes do, because it keeps you focused on the playability of your setting. So it makes it always available for you to be able to drop a game into it, and your players always to know what their purpose is. I love the game Aberrant by White Wolf Games, but I would say probably my biggest criticism with that entire setting is that there's a lot of places it makes a better book than it does a setting, because
Agreed.
It's so rich in history, but it's almost too rich in history, and you start wondering, like, well, where do I fit into it?
Yeah. Exactly.
I feel a lot of that also comes in Dune. Like, we have this, when you come from something like Dune, the book series and the movie, and you have all of this world building, you're being thrown into the middle of a pre-existing world that has literally, and if I'm not mistaken, and somebody correct me on this one, at least 10,000 years of active history that you're dealing with live.
Yeah, 10,000 was the number I was going to say from memory, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's like, that is all listed of how things went, but at the same time, they're helping you frame that you are a house among this history, and that it's just more settings, because it's a framework for where it's at. Shadowrun does another good job of that. This is the prehistory, but it doesn't tell you about the moment that you're living in. And I think there's a balance there, but you don't need that prehistory to play the game. It is good reference, but it's not there. Whereas I think, like with Aberrant, it's most of the plot feels like it's wrapped around this novelization that you're inserted into. Yeah,
you kind of have to look for the angles rather than it coming in preloaded. Like, we're very hard on D&D.
Yeah.
As you said in our earlier discussion when we were kind of priming the show here, D&D is the doof wagon of RPGs. And I absolutely love that.
It really is.
Yeah.
But we're very hard on it. But what it does, though, great, is that it comes in with an expectation of what you're going to be doing with it.
Yeah.
Like, pick your class that is going to go fight monsters, and here's a monster manual. Go fight monsters. Go have an adventuring day and explore this dangerous, fantastic world with dungeons and treasure and magic and wonder.
Yeah.
And mix it up.
Yeah.
And that's what you do in D&D,
right.
Yeah, I referenced it as the cheeseburger of games. Everybody has their version of it, but it really doesn't matter. Everyone knows it's still a cheeseburger at the beginning and at the end of the day. And whether it's a hamburger or a cheeseburger is the relevant point. Like, it's still the burger. It's America's.
Some people want to put pepperoni and mozzarella on it and call it a pizza burger, but we know what it is.
It's still a burger at the end of the day.
You can't fool us. Yeah. We know.
You can make it vegan. You can do whatever you want, but it doesn't matter. And that's the beauty of that. One of the things that you had said in our pre-meeting, which I thought was a really neat quote, and I want you to kind of go into this, is you said, "Drink deeply from the well that inspires you."
Yeah. Well, so for me, I think what happened, I mean, this circles back to your earlier question of what did I do first. What I didn't do was start with the mythology. What I did do was I sat down with my brother who was nearby, and I was like, all right, I have an idea. Stone Age D&D, let's go. And I was like, you're in the snow, I guess. And, oh, there's tracks that way. And we did this little survival scenario. And, you know, he killed something so he could get warm. And I was like, okay, I guess that's it, probably. And I quickly realized they're just like, the way that I thought of it when I started is the way I think a lot of people do when I pitch this. They're like, okay, but like that, there's not enough to do there. Like, you're going to kill something, you're going to get attacked by a beast, and then that's the end, right? So
yeah, you got food, shelter, water. What else you got? Congrats, you win the game.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So I sort of like, I was like, okay, well, let me think about this more. And I happened to be in the same town as him because I was getting ready to set off on a year-long trip around America. I had a remote job, and my wife and I were looking for a new town to raise our 3 kids in because we'd grown up in the DC area and we're ready to be somewhere else. So as I was traveling, I was looking for... I was looking out to the wilderness to be inspired, but also I was happened to fall into a couple of key things. One of which was the Appendix N Book Club podcast, which looks at sword and sorcery, like the books that inspired the very first role playing games. Okay. And I hadn't known about sword and sorcery as a separate genre. I hadn't known about its sort of its shape and its outline. And as I started listening to this podcast, I was like, this is what I love. And all of a sudden it came crystal clear to me why Tolkien had never clicked for me like it did for my brothers. It was just like, I am a sword and sorcery guy. I love this, this Fafhrd and Grey Mouse or Conan stuff. Like, this works for me.
You need something high octane. You know,
yeah, some high octane, some gray morals, some like extreme high and low disparity between, you know, civilization and wilderness. I think there's a lot of sort of magic that corrupts. There's all these different ideas baked in there, all of which then I just like pumped like pure raw form into Planegea. And I think the point about drinking deeply from inspiration is the game was interesting when it was like Mad Max with mammoths, and it had some fun stuff in there, right, directly drawn from those movies. But it wasn't until I really thought about like, what inspires me? Where does this come from? What is the, like, how can I just like soak in the inspiration here and take everything that comes up and be like, that feels right, that like rings true, that's like a tuning fork I can hit, and it's a pure note, and that's going into this material. And being free to do that, you know, freed by that quote, good artists borrow, great artists steal. So, you know, all of this, everything is a remix, right? Everything is pastiche. And so setting myself free, I was just reading something where it said, people worry too much about originality and not enough about authenticity. So worry less about, is this my new idea, and ask yourself, like, is this true? Is this like, does this ring true for the thing I'm trying to make? And I think just soaking in inspiration and then translating what rings true for the project you're working on is just a great way to put together something really special.
Yeah, what's interesting is the way you were talking about that reminds me, I was literally just watching a thing about Speed Racer, the movie. And how it was an incredible movie, and I agree, it really is an incredible movie. I will fight you. I will fight people on this. I'll be
right there next to you. I'm on your side.
But one of the things about the main character of the movie was they never lost their core principle of drive. The person just wants to drive, and everything is based upon that person driving to resolve the problem. Not like going out and becoming a kung fu master, also not saving the day by stopping the bad. No, like, I'm going to drive, and by driving, I'm going to beat everything. And that wraps the story around it, and within that is that purity of story. And I think there's a certain aspect of that, I mean, I'll flat out say it's something that we don't think about, Sarah, when we're creating our games. We often bury it in with what we're already doing. Like, what is sitting behind the theme even, or the feel? It's what is that core note that's running through this that makes the game feel a certain way, whether that feeling is, we are pirates. That is the core of this feeling. Or we are mercenaries. Like that is what this company is. And if you can keep that note rolling, we are family is a note that you can roll through and continue that to bleed through everything. And yours, like you said, is this metal enough? And I loved that concept and that feel, and the concept of being able to look at no matter what you're putting into the story and say, is this metal enough? Like, have I reached that level?
Are the speakers at 11 or are they only at 10?
Exactly.
Can I go up a notch? Can I invent a notch and then go up?
And it's not even so much about being angry or being aggressive or being threatening. It's just being to that level of
larger than life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Larger than life.
Yeah. You could have the warband leader in his furs, riding in on the mammoth. Or you could have the warband leader painted to the nines with spikes coming out of his stuff, screaming with a war cry with 40 guys hanging off the side of his mammoth with hooks.
Yeah.
Now you're winning with metal,
Tethered to the mammoth.
Now you're playing a Planegea game. You're doing it exactly right.
Tethered to the mammoth as he beats two gigantic war timpanis on the top of the mammoth. Yeah.
Exactly. Even the mammoth has raptor claws stitched into its feet.
Yes.
So that as it's moving, it's practically clawing like a cat into the ground.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, hang on while I get out my dice, because I just really want to play this game right now. Can we just play this game right now?
So let's talk about that. Your fundamentals of what you're focusing on, this concept of being cool and metal, how it wasn't obviously just you in the end working on. There was contributions. This became a team effort. How did you carry that through?
Yeah. Well, it was really cool. I posted up the map and a few other things on Reddit. Got a response like I'd never gotten before, where it was just like, okay, where are we going to follow this? Like, when are you going to post more? I had literally never used Discord at all. And someone was like, I made a Discord. We're talking about it in here now. Come in here. And it just became a community because people wanted this. And it was really interesting. I had a process of open development. So I would write something and I would post it at first on Reddit and then on Reddit and Discord, and get real-time feedback from people. So a big part of the reason that the book is as good as it is because it's been looked at. Every page, every word has been had, a group of hardcore nerds who really are invested, going over it and arguing about it and giving their insights. And in my day job, I'm a creative director, so I do a lot of giving and taking of criticism on art a lot. And something that I've really learned is critique is a gift. If someone is offering you feedback, they are taking their time to engage with what you're doing. And people are really bad at identifying the solutions, but they're really good at identifying problems. So if you have someone's like, oh man, this is terrible. I hate it. All your dinosaurs are so dumb. What I'd do is I'd make it all. You can basically stop after what I do or stop before what I do. Go back and say, oh, the dinosaurs aren't working. All right, cool. And then you can say thank you to this person who's just torn your thing apart. Really helpful. I appreciate it. So as we started engaging with this feedback and all right, here's Dinosaurs version 2. And people are like, oh, I like this more. There are a few people who were really, really extra engaged, extra insightful, and got what I was going for. And more I found myself pulling them in and being like, hey, before I send this to everyone else, you've got really good ideas. What do you think of this? And to me, it was always like, this will be fine if I make it. It will be great if we make it.
Yeah, Overwatch in our channel here was actually saying that he had downloaded a sampler PDF 2 years ago that had half Ooze people in it.
Oh yeah, half Ooze is a race, for sure.
Oh wow.
Absolutely.
So there you go.
Yeah.
One of our listeners was part of that group, and I think that's fantastic that you were able to not just listen to the feedback, but to, I guess, hear the overwhelm of the feedback questions that came to you of like, I can question this, and that's okay. I'm not. This isn't just like my baby, don't touch it. You're not hearing what I'm saying. I'm saying things. What are you hearing?
Right, and we actually talk a lot about that with like even just in your game during your game session, where your players will tell you what they want out of your game session. If your players are going off on some random direction that isn't your main plot, one way to take that is, why aren't they playing the main plot? This is so insulting. But another is to like, well, what are they going after? Because clearly they're interested in that, and they're asking for it.
Yeah, and in your mind, you have this vision of the plot because you have everything else in your head. When you're when David puts this out on the internet, they're only seeing those pages.
Yeah,
they don't have the other concept or even the feel sometimes, because it's very hard to get that feeling out without a lot of explanation and reading through between the lines to be able to have them say, oh, he's making everything metal, or he's doing this, or and so in that you're able to take a look and see what the mirror of everyone else's vision, what they're seeing, which is beautiful when you get that chance.
Well, and I think there's something that's true about this is like, you can argue with people on the internet all day long about why they are wrong and stupid and your thing is great, but you won't be able to do that with people who buy the book if it becomes a book, right? They're just going to have the thing and you won't be there to explain it. And so for me, every time there was one thing I ran into over and over very early on, which is the persistent feedback, oh, this is a game where I'm going to be stupid and hit stuff with a rock. And I was just like, that is not what I mean. And I got really not frustrated personally, but just like, I was like, I don't know how to get this across, that the idea is you can have 20 intelligence. You can be as smart as you can possibly be, and you're still in the Stone Age, and that's still something you have to deal with. And so I tried this and that, certain explanations of how this could work, but ultimately, until I found a world-building way to be like, in my case, it was, there are metaphysical forces that just kill you if you rise above a certain technology level. Everyone is forced to remain in the Stone Age, no matter how brilliant they are. And you don't have to use that if you don't want to. Here's some ways around that. DMs, if that's not your style, that's fine. But having that thing where it's like, let me put in a world-building way to make it easy for you to see and understand and experience the thing that is most important to me, rather than just arguing and be like, no, you can be smart in the Stone Age. World build your way out of it. Find a way to make it playable and engaging.
Yeah. Like, I'm going to make gunpowder, or I know how to make poisons. Like, if I'm that smart, I should be able to do these things. Like, yeah, you could make advanced metals in D&D fantasy as well.
Right,
you have to find all the materials, but at the same point, you don't have access to this learning.
Hey, my character, your source,
and that fun is not wrong, right? Like, if that's what someone wants to pursue at their table, then fine. Yeah. It's just, that's not all the fun that's to be had. So let me give you this tool as a DM where you can tell other kinds of stories, and then you can choose what you want to do at your table for what's fun with your group.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about arming them with options.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Exactly.
So we've talked about where it came from. We've talked about how you worked on it. We've talked around it and what this thing is, and that it's dinosaurs in this Mad Maxian world. I mean, yes, it's still placed inside of D&D. So what makes this fit in D&D, and what makes it different than other D&D settings? What is the uniqueness there? And how do you marry those things? Because again, it's still D&D. There's still classes per se. There's still alignments and things you have to work with. How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, I really wanted it to be not just, and this might sound funny I know you guys are a sophisticated set of consumers, you and your audience of RPGs. So this might sound a little funny, but I really wanted it to be a love letter to D&D and to D&D 5th edition, and not fight against, but really embrace and express the origins of the game and the expression of the game that I had enjoyed so much with my friends and family. And so there were a few things that I did. One was, and this is directly taken from Eberron, Eberron was built with the concept that everything in D&D is in this world. It just might not look how you expect. So that was my goal. I was like, if it's in any D&D source book, it needs to have a way in which it could make sense in this world. And so what that led to was just, you know, D&D is, like we said, it's the doof wagon, right? You attach things onto D&D. You just like, I don't know, how about this, like, giant horn? I'm going to hammer it on here. And oh, now we have pirate ship mechanics. Like, we'll put that on there too.
How about a guy with a flamethrower guitar? Why not?
Exactly, right? So so it was important that it embraced that sort of maximal aesthetic from the beginning. And the way that I went about that was a couple of things. One, I felt very comfortable renaming things like classes. So, for example, you know, cleric or monk are words that suggest organized religion over a long time, right? So these became shaman and ascetic, and those weren't the only things that got renamed. A lot of stuff got renamed, but all of that drove towards the idea of you can have the class fantasy of being a brilliant person who studies deeply and engages with the world deeply. What does that look like if you don't have the tool of writing? You know, maybe that is where cave paintings come from. Maybe cave paintings are ancient wizards, or as they're called in this game, spellskins, who are trying to work out the shape of magic for the first time through these mystical paintings on the walls that then they tattoo on their own bodies.
Oh, yeah, right.
So in each case, it was like, let me look at the thing. Let me make sure you're getting that core experience, but it's sort of turned 90 degrees and feels fresh. Another example is shortly before, or maybe while making it, I saw a like someone who put so much work into it, and I don't mean this as a slam on that person in any way. There was this world that I saw where it was like, okay, here's what's different about this world. Orcs, they're the cool, sophisticated ones, and elves, they're the barbarians. I was like, okay, that's not what I want. It's fine if that's what they want. But for me, what I want is I want elves to be elves, but I want them to be like this primal. If I rewind elves, if I take elves and I move them back and I'm like, just like, like keep cranking the knob of history backwards. Where do the things that make elves, especially elves in D&D, come from and feel like they feel? And I'm like, okay, well, there's this like fae influence, and they're sort of ethereal, and, you know, and I would look back at like ancient folklore and history, and I was really inspired by the idea from many mythologies of the dream world. And I was like, what if there is a dream world, and what if elves come from the dream world? And what if they are effectively half dream, and they're sort of translucent, and they have move in and out of dreams, and all these things felt very elven. They felt related to the way you want to play an elf, but it was sort of like it was turned back through time. And I took that through every class, every race, every character option. I have a thing in here about magic, the different schools of magic in D&D. And I was like, what if we thought about which race might have sort of pioneered this magic? So, you know, maybe it's a situation where dwarves made abjuration magic. And if you want to flavor abjuration magic as dwarvish, it's like, here's the kind of sounds it makes and the kind of moves they make and what they do with the material components. And so for all of these things, it's just like, how do I make this feel like the game you want to play, but stripped back to something that feels more primal?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so much more interesting having done that, having put all the thought into essentially devolving D&D from from Western medieval to, you know, quasi-Western medieval to you know, prehistoric. And going through that process with each and every thing, rather than just saying like, "Oh, it's D&D, but you have stone weapons."
Yeah, the elves are still sleek and knowledgeable and otherworldly, but they're ancient at this point somehow. You know, whereas no, they're proto and
Right.
they're still trying to kind of put themselves together. I mean, it feels very Fae-like.
Yeah.
Like from Seventh Sea has the She, which is effectively the Fae race, and it's almost a direct acknowledgement of the Fae coming from some other world and then presenting themselves in this mortal kind of existence that we have in realism. They can't express themselves the same way as they can express in their place. And because of that, they have the presence of humanity and look slightly human, but they are not. They don't procreate in the same way, so they have to steal our children to be able to do it. Things like that. And so I see a lot of that carrying through of this proto-race of elves that, are this etherealness. I love that concept, and that you could confuse them with Fae, but at the same time they're not, because they're so proto. And I think that's great. I love that concept. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, it was so much fun. Like, this is a world where it posits that that mortal races actually precede the gods, and the gods are only beginning to develop now through the belief of mortals. And so you have these proto-gods who are very animistic. They're tied to locations. So a god can't leave its hallow, which is its little lair, basically. And so these gods are these extremely powerful spellcasting beings, but it could be a cave bear that people have been afraid of for 100 years. They've been afraid of it enough that they brought it food and, offerings, and now it has taken on as sort of cult, divine magic has accrued around it. And so the gods become this really fun, exciting combination magic shop and quest giver, because they can't leave their hallow, so they need you to go and carry out their will, and they want you to build shrines to them to enhance their power, and they can give you that magic sword if you'll just go over there and do that. And that's what I'm talking about with this embracing the sword and sorcery and the D&D, because at its core it's you got somebody who has a magic thing and wants you to go kill a thing. That's D&D. But you're doing it.
That's the quest
You're
loop.
doing it for a cave bear god who can't leave its hill.
I mean, he's 18 feet tall and he glows blue with runes, but he's still just a bear.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, he literally has scars of battle that he had with your ancestors.
Right, and the thing he wants you to go kill is the champion of the Salmon King over in the river. You know?
There's a
Bring
giant
me his head to eat.
Yeah, and there's a giant turtle who's probably allergic to humans, but he still needs them, because
Exactly.
he moves so damn slow.
That's exactly it.
Yeah, I love that. That is fantastic. And it's
so amazing.
It's rich, and yet it still follows that theme. It's metal.
Uh-huh.
It's still at that core, that hardness that pulls everything back together again. And
it still fits with your design element of everything that exists in D&D has to find some way to trickle into your world. And one of the major throughputs of D&D is that concept of the gods derive their powers from their believers.
Yes.
Right.
And so you found a way, you're like, well, what would happen if the believers were prehistoric? Well, the gods wouldn't exist yet. You devolved the gods along with everything else,
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it was really cool because as I was writing, I actually didn't start with this, but as I was writing, I kept on finding these through lines of, oh yeah, that feels right. And I eventually wound up batching them into 3 sort of pillars, which were kinetic action, which is the Mad Max thing, primordial horror, which is sort of this, it comes from sword and sorcery a lot, but there's this very Lovecraftian vein, and also I think just the experience of being sort of pre-writing, pre-history. You don't have explanations for things, right? You see the lightning and you truly have no idea why that exists or what to make of it.
There's no tomes of ancient lore.
Yeah. And then taking that out farther and obviously in a world with magic, you can have a lot scarier things than lightning. Sure. And so just keep on cranking up that horror. But the other thing, the third one, which is really important to me, and actually also comes from Fury Road, is there's this one moment, and this will mean more to those who have seen the film than others, but it's this very wild, violent film. There's this moment of peace when they're driving and they're not directly under attack, and one of the people that they're rescuing reaches up and touches the inside of the cab of the truck that they're driving, and it has got this patterned hammered gold tile basically up on top, this this pattern ceiling, and she runs her fingers over it, and it's this lyrical moment. And it struck me when I was watching. I was like, "There's something going on there." And then I was watching an interview with George Miller, the director, and the interviewer picked up on that moment and asked about it, and he was like, so excited. You could tell he was on a press junket. He had answered the same questions a million times. He was so excited about this question because what she picked up on, and what rang true for me too, and what George Miller cared a lot about, is people create beauty. There's records of art that was made in prison camps in the worst of circumstances. Like, people make beauty, they make pattern, they make meaning, even in dire circumstances. And we see this with cave paintings. We see this throughout humanity. And so this idea, blend that together with that Jurassic Park moment as the music swells and he first sees the dinosaur and he's like staggering backwards and like peeling off his sunglasses. That idea of mystic wonder was really, really the third pillar that locked in the setting. And so kinetic action, primordial horror, and mystic wonder, as I started writing more, once I figured those out, I would like check it against that list. Anything I was writing, I was like, where's the action, or where's the horror, or where's the wonder? And by making sure that it always had those three ingredients, it continued to feel like Planegea.
Okay,
that's amazing. Yeah,
that's fantastic. So at this point, when did you feel like you were done? Like, what was the moment where you're like, you set the pen down and went, okay, this is good enough?
Yeah.
How
do you ever finish a baby like this?
Yeah.
I mean, an RPG setting, literally by definition, is never done, right? I mean, like, isn't Ed Greenwood still writing stuff for the Forgotten Realms now? I think there's like a rock that he hasn't written a whole book about yet.
Fair.
But so my first game making my first like published game making was in board games. Board games have this really strong ethos of like, play test it instantly. Like, as soon as you have the idea, scribble it out on paper, throw it in front of people, and go. And so for me, the idea was done enough when I heard and saw people playing sort of like the spirit of what I'd intended. It didn't need to be a finished book. Like, I could write 10 more Planegea books super, super happily. Like, there's a zillion things that I didn't put in the book. But I started hearing about people who are running games and were doing exactly what you were doing earlier in this podcast, right? They were saying like, oh yeah, and it has claws and it's loping along, and it's just like getting that metal experience, or talking about these gods they'd made that were just like awesome and mystical. And so for me, the setting felt done, or done is probably the wrong word. It felt alive when other people made it alive and adopted it as their own. And then from then, it was just like, is there anything that I would be like, that I feel like they would be missing something important, or that some part, is there a player who would be disappointed if something that I have in my head was left out of the book? Like, is there enough in here? If someone wants to play an elf, is there going to be enough for them? If someone really loves fighters, is this going to like be what they need? And so once I had put in threats that handled all the different monster types in 5e, and once I had made factions that tapped into all the different races and classes, and once I had sort of created enough DM guidance where I felt like, yeah, I mean, there's more that I could say, but I feel like you could run a game off of this. Somewhere in there, it got done.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was a matter of that you needed, for your own personal on this one, you felt that you needed to make sure it connected with D&D on a far enough level that someone a player, would pick it up and go, I can see myself in this world and I feel the world.
Yeah,
okay.
I think so. Because I think for a setting, it's not like... It's just is not about the lore. All of the lore gets changed. Like, so many people run Planegea games, and the first thing they change is the name, because they don't like it, because it's a pun, and that's fine, because that's not the setting. The lore isn't the setting. The setting is the feeling that it creates at the table. It's this sort of effect. I think David Foster Wallace talked about the end of Infinite Jest, and he says if it's working, it sort of like hums and projects the ending out in front of you. And I feel like if a setting is working, it hums and projects the emotion that you're trying to create. And then the rest, and that can be done in a page. Like I have made this space opera sort of sci-fi sword and sorcery setting called Prismanox that I literally put on one PDF that's the size of a movie poster. And it's a whole setting, and it's fine. And it's like, you can play it based on that, and it's doing its job. And it doesn't need more. So as soon as the head setting is humming and projecting the emotion and the experience, then you're good. It's done.
Yeah.
Right on.
That's fantastic. We do have some questions that came from our Discord members, and we'd love to throw them at you and share kind of answering through this. And then we'll do a little bit more. But Nevin, one of our people, said, when creating worlds, should we start on a macro scale, looking at the big picture, or on a micro scale?
Mm-hmm.
I think we already touched on this one a little bit here, yeah.
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, I think you already, I was actually going to prompt you here. I think you already kind of touched on this. You said, like, start small, start local, don't start with your mythology, Even that your first getting started on running, games on Twitter, you started in medias res.
Yeah.
With, like, you're running, there's a shack, it's raining, get shelter, and that was your world building. There's a shack, it's raining.
Yeah. And for me, it's always been, it's something that I've talked about a lot on this, is that your players don't see beyond the mountains that you tell them about.
Yeah.
So there's no reason to write beyond the mountains, because there's nothing going on there.
Because what's going on over there doesn't matter. The story's here.
Correct.
Yep.
And I think you expose that in just like, okay, I can do this scene. Where does this scene lead? What is the feeling where I need to express? And I think that's the big thing on the micro scale, is you're setting a place, and that place has a feeling. And so on that micro scale, that's a great place to start, is, okay, how does it play?
Yep. That's right. Yeah. I worked with Justin Alexander at Atlas Games to finish publishing this. And he's a great developer. And his advice that he had published long before I started working with him is prep scenario or prep situations, not plots.
Oh, yeah.
And
got
I think
whole
that's
shows about that.
Always great advice.
Yeah.
And then I think it applies for world building too, right? Don't world build a plot, world build a situation.
Yeah.
A problem that needs to be solved.
Yep. That's exactly the way I'm glad we are all on the same page.
Absolutely.
It makes me feel that this podcast is doing a good thing. Another thing is there a checklist to follow when creating worlds? I think in the two elements that I heard from you, one was defining what your players are, what are the adventurers doing in this world? What are the forces against the adventurers in this world, and what is the feeling of the world? What is the overall thread that you're trying to keep alive in the feeling of what's going on around them? And then I think the other thing is, how does that fit to the system? If it's the system that you're trying to tie it to.
Right.
Can you legitimately see the system's ties directly to it without having to completely homebrew everything?
Yeah. I think that's so important. Because it's an entirely different question. What's the checklist if you're building for Apocalypse World versus D&D, or like take it further, if you're building for Dread, or if you're building for Lasers versus Feelings, or whatever, like it's or a cozy RPG, right? So,
or even no RPG altogether, if you're just writing a setting book that's RPG agnostic, you know.
Perfect. Yeah, exactly. So I think the question is not just what world do I want to make, and does it vibe with this system, but really, if you're working with the system, what does this system do best? And how can I, because this is the whole thing with, I can only speak from my experience, right? So this is just like based off of this one writing project that I've done, but all of it was, okay, but how can this do what D&D does best, what 5e specifically does best?
Yeah.
So look at go back again. This is about soaking in the inspiration. I mean, I can't tell you how much time I spent watching YouTube videos where D&D designers explained how they thought of magic. And I recently got kind of like in a little like heated discussion on my Discord because I was like, wait, I don't understand this category of magic. And people are like, well, what are you talking about? It doesn't matter. It's like, no, it matters. I need to understand the design intent of the designers so that I can like make this feel like D&D in the way that I'm going for. Yeah. So I think soaking in the literature that inspires you or the TV or the games, whatever, but also soaking in the mechanics if you're writing to a system and really being like, how do I do this really well? And if you're agnostic, then making sure that, I guess I would say just like that everything is, I guess the thing that I would say there is make it present tense, like really focus on what people are doing right then. We already kind of talked about that. Mm-hmm. And then the other really good advice I heard and followed, and I'm happy that I followed, was Keith Baker, who made Eberron. Mm-hmm. He was talking about world building as stacking crates of dynamite. Mm. And I absolutely love that as my job is to not explain why all of this works. My job is to make it incredibly unstable and ready to fall down in a second. Huh. And I think a lot of us spend a lot of time trying to build worlds where it's like, well, wait, this wouldn't work because, that empire would come over there and just crush them in a minute because they don't have defenses. And you're like, that's called a story hook.
Yeah.
That's called a campaign.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you can't explain everything. You can explain intention. You can explain direction, but everything else is a plot that sits underneath that. And I love that. Like 7th Sea has all the motivations of all of the villains, but it doesn't say what their active events are.
Yep.
Like this person is intent on doing this and has this power level, and you're like, well, then they should have already been able to do it. Okay, why haven't they? I'm not going to tell you who's stopping them. You kind of already know. It's called the heroes. And so that gap, that space that you're leaving, that is imperfect. That if you fill it, I'm sorry, you're now writing a novel.
Yeah,
you filled in all the gaps. Now your storyteller doesn't need to do anything.
Yeah. That's what we talked about Aberrant earlier, and that was the one flaw that they made. Was they started filling in those gaps, and they started explaining everything.
Yeah. One of the last questions that Nevim has is, what kind of mistakes can be easily avoided when creating worlds, and how did you avoid them, or how do you avoid them?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. There is a mistake where you can be too fiddly with the presentation early, which is a mistake that I made. It's easy to fiddle with fonts. It's easy to worry about how it looks, and it needs to be good enough that people will read it and like be legible. But I really wish I had spent less time being sort of precious about the look and just like I wound up having to redo a lot of that look and feel stuff. I guess there's another side to that coin too, which is if it's not immediately for commercial use, as long as you credit it, finding a piece of art that expresses a part of the idea is really great and can really help people to lock into the world. I think part of the reason the book did work to those earlier audiences is I grabbed some art from Riot Games and from Far Cry Primal and from here and there. And I was like, this is kind of what I'm talking about. And I think that helped people understand. And also, there's an old trick of like grabbing a piece of art for a location when you're running a game and then just bringing stuff from the photograph or from the piece of art into what you're doing, even though if it wasn't part of your plan. So I would look at that piece of art and be like, well, wait, they have like a glowing amulet. What do amulets have to do with my world? And so that would start off a whole nother chain of ideas. So interacting with art, both like not being too precious about it, but also letting it inspire you. If you're a visual creator like I am, can be a really, really good tool.
One thing I might also add, I think, because I've seen a lot of discussion about this online, is I think a common trope or common pitfall for people when they are trying to create their own worlds is trying so hard to come up with something unique that if you even begin to recognize that you've drawn inspiration from an existing source, you throw it out because, I don't want to copy off of X, Y, or Z existing IP. And I know, David, you come at this a lot differently because you are actually physically publishing, your settings and such. So you have to, you do have to look at things like plagiarism and whatnot. But like 99.9% of us, myself included, I'm never going to publish anything. I'm just doing this for my home game, for my friends.
Exactly.
So plagiarism laws don't apply to me because I'm not making money off of the things that I do at a rainy Saturday afternoon at my table, rolling some dice with my friends. So I would say the easy pitfall to avoid if you are thinking of, that's plagiarism and I shouldn't take... No. Disabuse yourself of that. Steal everything.
Yeah. If you want to make a Dick Tracy game, make a Dick Tracy game.
Yeah.
Do it.
Yeah.
Steal 100%. Yeah.
Some of the best tabletop games I've ever heard of being run are blockbuster movies with the serials numbers filed off.
That's right.
Where they're like, we're going to play Die Hard, but I'm not going to call it Nakatomi Plaza, and I'm going to see if anybody notices.
Yeah, and honestly, I bring that up all the time, is that if you set the same setting in front of someone of the same events of Nakatomi Plaza, it is not going to play out like the movie.
No.
If you have a perfectly good scene and setting and feeling and NPCs and everything you need, you know how all that's going to function. Don't expect it to go that way, but steal it 100%, whole cloth, without question.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I would add to that too. Like, I think the idea, like the obsession with being original, is a really, really recent development in like human art making. And if you think about Roman mythology, that's pretty old. Like, they were just ripping off the Greeks. And if you think about some of the greatest work ever made, like Dante's Inferno, that is nothing but pastiche. That is purely he's ripping off the Greeks. He's telling about people that they knew that he was like making fun of. If you think about the Knights of the Round Table, those were all borrowed stories. Like, actually everything is remix. And for us to put that pressure on ourselves to be original is not only unnecessary and a burden, it's also a little bit like it kind of disregards the main flow of storytelling throughout history and throws all kinds of babies out with the bathwater, when really the joy of remix is a deeply human experience. And I know for me, I run a kitchen sink fantasy game for my home group that's actually not in Planegea because it started before that was done. And it's a pretty like story driven exploration, like real high stakes kind of games. But I'm still throwing in pop culture references left and right, and it actually doesn't break the immersion for anyone. It's like, we're talking about this. Like, that feels like this thing. Great. I love that thing. Let's go. It helps.
Yeah.
No, I do that all the time with my 7th game. I bring in pop culture references because it's easy it's easy for your players to reference, to get the feeling, to get the sound, to get the tone of the moment.
Captain Vampa.
Captain Vampa. I literally stole one of my characters, which was Captain Vampa
from Count of Monte Cristo.
Count of Monte Cristo, because I wanted people to know who that person was.
Yep. And didn't even change the name.
Nope. Didn't.
And we love it.
Yep.
Just absolutely love it.
Yeah.
Just here now.
Yeah. And that was it's those types of things, like kind of going back to your art, literally while you were talking about the remix of art, I was thinking of Dante's Inferno. Like, in the top of my head, I'm like, it's just a rebirth. Everything is just a rebirth.
Yeah.
But to bring it all back home, there's a reason why Weird Al made tons of albums and everybody loves him. He was honest about what he was doing.
Yeah.
And in the end, people loved it. Even the people he was parodying were just like, please do this. Not only does it bring me fame, because you're mixing something that maybe someone who's never heard my music will now go listen to the original, but at the same time, like, we're all having fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going back to the root and the core of what this is meant to be, which is fun.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
If you can't peel that layer, I'm sorry. Let's replay the battles of Antietam exactly as the forces were, and just under different randomized rules. Okay, great. It's a board game. Fantastic.
Yeah. And if utter originality is your fun, that is also not wrong.
No,
right?
Agreed.
Like, if that is what makes your creator brain tick, like, that is awesome. It will probably be more work and less accessible to others. Because if you're trying to do that and nothing has any reference to anything else, then it's just like, it's going to be a little harder to grok.
Right.
There was someone, I can't remember his name. I'm sorry. There was someone who really deeply studied what makes something cool a while ago. And this was like I want to say like the 50s. And he basically boiled it down to an element of the familiar and an element of the unfamiliar put together in terms of like design of things, not necessarily behaviors or attitudes, but like stuff.
Yeah.
I think that I want to say that was rebirthed later because the concept came into why was the chia pet such a thing? It was because it was something of the familiar, growing plants at home, and something of the unfamiliar. It's the shape of a animal,
of a sheep,
and it's coming through pottery. But everybody attached to it in such a weird way, because it was different and cool, and yet there was nothing unique about it. Truly,
it had a catchy theme song.
I mean, there was that as well. It sold
the theme
well.
song was good.
Yeah.
All right, so Overwatch has something that was answered, but I didn't know if you wanted to go into it more. Was there a specific moment of inspiration that brought the idea of Planegea to life? Or if not, how did it form over time? We kind of talked about how it formed over time, but it was that moment in 10,000 BC.
It was a few different moments, but I think I'll say the one other really formative early moment. There were a lot of moments, but another big one was when the idea of the gods came together, and that was again immersing in the material. I was like, surely I can't be the first person to write Stone Age fantasy. Spoiler, I am super not. And in fact, H.G. Wells wrote the story of the Stone Age, and I don't know that it's great literature. I definitely know that there are objectionable aspects to it. But I was reading that, and I was beginning Clan of the Cave Bear, which also, same warnings apply. And between the two of them, they were talking about sort of animals as gods or animals as spirits. And the sort of alchemy of reading those two things around the same time brought together this vision of gods in this kind of very different way. And I think when that clicked through, it was like, oh, well, those can function like kings or local governments or lords in the game, and they can be magic shops and quest givers and there was sort of this like chain reaction in my brain that I was like, oh yeah, okay, there's a game here.
Yep.
No, that's fantastic. Knox actually asked, I know David talks about swapping traditional D&D spells and such for more prehistoric talismans and stuff, but what inspired such innovation? And does he have any tips for stretching those concepts into other themes and genres?
Yeah, for sure. My biggest tip is what does that do in the game? Like, what's the fantasy, right? What are people trying to get out of that thing? And then how can you like allow that fantasy in a different way? So, you think about a spell scroll in Planegea, there's no writing, so you don't have scrolls, you have talismans that you can crack open and then the spell releases. And that, the thought there came from, well, what's great about a spell scroll? It's a consumable item. You pick it up, you use it once, you don't really have to know what you're doing, and it releases and it's used up and then it's done. And it's like, all right, well, yeah, what if you like break off a little firecracker and then it happens? And so I think a lot of things can work like that. And I think for really any genre, you can look at what role does this play in the game or in the fiction? How can I have that feeling, but be called and maybe even like look something very different? So you could think about a dwarf being like this super strong, like person who's really connected to tradition, and think about something like steampunk, and you might think, well, like, what does that look like? Maybe it looks like a person who is made of metal, who has like these songs from the people who forged them, like carved into their metal, and that when steam courses through them, these voices rise out, and those chants like drive them forward with this unstoppable like locomotive force. That's actually a dwarf, because what you did is you just thought, what is a dwarf? And then you expressed it through the aesthetics of the genre that you're using.
Love it.
Yeah, that's incredibly beautiful.
Yeah, it really is.
So, is there anything else you wanna say as a wrap up, or anything else you want to address with Planegea or to our audience?
I guess the other thing I'd say is like, I guess a question earlier was about mistakes that were made that would be avoidable. And sure. I think one thing that a mistake that I made early on was, I stayed too close to some of the original literature and some of the material that later I couldn't stand by as I learned more. Just stuff that just like isn't suitable for modern games, stuff that sort of like fell a little tone deaf on my ears as I read it as a person living today. But a lot of that stuff I wrote into some of the very early materials. And what I would encourage anyone to do is, if you're working on something and there's part of it that you're uncomfortable with in a bad way, like there can be stuff that you're uncomfortable with in a good way. Like if you're writing horror, you want it to be making you uncomfortable. But if there's something that like you really don't feel right about, even if it's core to what you're doing, it's okay to stop to ask yourself, like, does this feel right? I mean, in so many ways, this is like, that taking a moment at the table, looking around, making sure that people are having fun. Don't forget to keep making it fun and making sure that it's fun for you and for the people who are at the table. And if that means you have to rip out big chunks of stuff and drop it behind you and like move forward, then fine. You're leaving behind something that isn't fun and that isn't making it fun for you or us at the table. So I would just say, like, be brave when it comes to editing and to ripping out stuff. And that can be true for objectionable stuff, or it can be just true for stuff that like is the kill your darlings advice in some way. It's like if there was something that was great at the start and you don't need it anymore, like it's okay. You can just keep going, keep following the fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lines and veils apply to writing your own stuff.
Vibe check yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree with that statement. I was always amazed that 7th Sea, set in its time period, didn't address slavery. It's not there.
Yeah.
It's not talked about. And it's unnecessary. It was easily removed. Poverty is there. Clearly there's servitude that's expressed.
Sure.
But it's veiled. Like, if you want to include slavery, you most definitely could do it in that universe, but it is not expressed.
Yep.
But it's also not nixed at the same time. The person just said, I don't feel comfortable having this in here, we're not going to include it.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I love that concept that you can do that and feel comfortable with going back and changing. If you were like, yeah, I included this I included this whole race being, slaves, and that's what built them into this tough nation, I can go back and retcon that.
Yeah.
Like, that's not important. The fact that they're a tough nation can be made from any number of ways.
Yes.
Let's figure out a different way to do that, because that's not the important thing, really. And it's not important to be said that way.
Right.
You could say they were subjugated, but you don't have to say how. You don't have to go into details. You don't have to make it feel anything like that. If somebody wants to make that assumption in their game, they can assume it that way.
Yep.
That's their choice.
Yep, absolutely.
So,
well, all right. Well, where can people find Planegea if they wanna take a look?
Yeah, absolutely. Planegea.com, spelled just as it sounds, obviously, it'll kick you over to a Patreon. If you just Google Planegea, it'll pop up. There's a subreddit, there's a Discord. The Kickstarter page still is getting updates posted, so you can follow that. It's not hard to find. If you Google Stone Age D&D or Stone Age 5e, you should find it pretty fast.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, David Somerville, author of Planegea, and for all your great insights on world building. We really enjoyed having you on the show.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me. This has been great. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
You're welcome.
So next week's topic is going to actually kind of be a little bit about what David was just kind of talking about. Is some of like the negative stereotypes and such like that in gaming of, orcs being violent monsters and elves always being haughty and, gnomes being little, thieves and stuff like that. And there's been a lot of discussion about that in the media and whatnot. I know Wizards of the Coast has been making some big sweeping changes to some of the lore to kind of go back and tidy up a lot of the insensitivities and such like that as they're perceived in the modern era. And so Rob and I are going to do our best to just kind of have a discussion about that, about where they came from, what place, they have in gaming. Are they helpful? Are they hurtful? Do they need to be changed? Those sort of things. Anyway, you can find us on Twitter at @ST_Conclave, on Instagram at @ST_Conclave. Listen to us live every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on mixlr.com/storyteller-conclave, and join us up on our Discord. We'd love to have you join the discussion, talk to the other great storytellers that are up there, shoot us some show questions, and you can find that link on our Twitter as well as our website, storytellerconclave.com.
We'd like to thank our Patreon members who support us every single month, especially our name members who joined us in the Discord today and had some wonderful questions come through. Knox in the Box, Subjet, Sam, The Arcane Asylum, Sparkle Motion Veteran, Hulavu, and Sean. We truly appreciate all your support. Our pre-show music today was by Sonar Village. It's actually from the Planegea Songs of the Stone Age soundtrack that you can pick up at atlasgames.com. It's a 5-album collection with 18 tracks, 18 ambient tracks, and 18 mixed tracks. And it is pretty incredible. I highly recommend that you go at least take a look at that. If you're going to be doing this, it's a great background music. Our intro music is Beyond the Warriors by Geefrog. You can find that at geefrog.bandcamp.com or on YouTube Music. And our outro music, which you're hearing right now, is Only Our Footprints in the Sand by Midair Machine. You can find that at freemusicarchive.org.
And a big shout out, as always, to our friends, to our family, Vicky and Sean. Thank you so much for loving and supporting us. All of our friends who sat at our tables over these years to give us these great stories to share with you. Our special guest today, Mr. David Somerville. Thank you so much, David, for joining us. And you, every single one of our listeners. We love you guys so much.
Good night.
Good night.